Hi everyone! During lockdown last year, lots of people found new interests. They may have gotten into baking or yoga or discovered a knack for painting. As you'll know if you've been watching this channel for a while, I'm someone who is clinically extremely vulnerable to COVID-19, so I had to shield for a lot of last year. And before Leslie and I started our business, I needed to find ways to occupy my time. And what I got into were podcasts. I'll be honest with you, for years I resisted the idea of podcasts, mostly because I couldn't see when I would find the time to properly listen to one. I worked in a nursery with young children, so I couldn't be having a podcast playing whilst I was interacting with them. We weren't allowed to have something playing in the background, and I liked music in the car while I was driving to and from work. Once I got home from work, I had loads of other stuff that I did, such as making these videos and studying for my DCP, practicing for chorus, you name it. I had lots of things to occupy my time with, and I just couldn't see when I was going to have the time to give podcasts my full attention. And then along came 2020 and I had nothing but time on my hands. Fast forward to now and I am a full-on lover of podcasts. I listen to a podcast every single morning whilst I'm doing my makeup, if I'm doing any chores around the house like cooking or polishing my room or making my bed. I've pretty much always got a podcast on the go whilst I do it. And yes, although I still love driving along listening to music, quite often now I will pop a podcast on in the car. In fact, I enjoy listening to podcasts so much these days that I decided, why not share my favourites with you guys? I'm subscribed to probably 10 or 12 podcasts, but I have whittled it down to my top 8. Yes, that's a strange number to go with, but shh, I'm going with it anyway. The Adam Buxton Podcast. This was one of the very first podcasts I started listening to, not long after I decided I was going to give podcasts a go. Back in the day, I was a huge fan of the Adam and Joe show on TV, so I already had a soft spot for Adam, and Leslie had recommended this podcast to me several times, so I thought, okay, it's about time I actually gave it a listen. There is something about Adam's podcast that makes me feel all warm and fuzzy, like I've just had a lovely catch-up with a friend. He also has some really genuinely fascinating guests on his show from the worlds of literature, art, music, philosophy, you name it. He's probably interviewed someone from it. In fact, I quite often get to the end of an episode and feel like I've learnt something by osmosis. Also, although there is another strong contender on this list, I genuinely think Adam's podcast has the catchiest theme tune of any podcast. Morbid, a true crime podcast. Hosted by the fabulous Ash and Elena, this is by far and away my absolute favourite true crime podcast, and possibly my favourite podcast full stop. It's fair to say it's probably not for the faint-hearted. They do tackle some very infamous murder cases and they do go into a lot of detail. But whilst the girls' sense of humour and the amazing chemistry they have between them means that you can listen to even the goriest, scariest stuff and somehow still be entertained is probably the wrong word, but something in that ballpark. They never trivialise anything, and they're always really sensitive towards the cases they cover and the people directly affected by them. It's a perfect balance between actually telling you what happens in some of these horrendous cases and making you feel like you're just having a chit-chat with friends who happen to share a slightly morbid interest with you. I will admit that listening to this one in the mornings when I'm doing my makeup sometimes leads to interesting results. Oh my god! And then what happened? Billy Joel A to Z. And yes, it's hosted by two American comedians called Dave Juskow and Elon Altman. And yes, I said Z and not Z, but I'm British and I cannot say A to Z. It just doesn't sound right coming out of my mouth. I absolutely love the music of Billy Joel, so it stands to reason that I would love a podcast in which two very funny, very warm and witty hosts go through his entire discography from the songs that begin with A to the songs that begin with Z, and they rank them, they talk about where other people have ranked them, they share trivia about those songs, they discuss how many times they've been played live. It's just a lot of fun if you are a fan of Billy Joel, and I am, so I love it. Also, this is the only podcast on this list where I've had a personal mention, and they pronounce my surname right, which is very unusual. People usually say it wrong. So well done! My mate bought a toaster. I think the concept of this show is genuinely awesome. Host Tom Price interviews an array of celebrities and discovers their untold stories and secrets via their Amazon purchase history. Hearing a famous actor, comedian, or musician explore everything from the mundane to the meaningful via the items they've purchased over the years is really genuinely fascinating. Although I do sometimes wonder whether my Amazon purchase history is just deathly dull or incredibly embarrassing, or both. Fake doctors, real friends. Back in the day, I was obsessed with the TV show Scrubs, and I hugely empathised with the character of JD, the nerdy, musical theatre-loving character who narrated his own life and occasionally just drifted off into fantasies. I can't think why. Now I enjoy best friends Zach Braff and Donald Faison's look back at the show they made all those years ago, discussing each episode as they go along and interviewing fellow cast members and crew members from the show. This is also the other podcast on this list with an insanely catchy theme tune which I cannot help but sing along to. There is a small caveat with this podcast in as much as I love it, I don't listen to it to the end. I feel bad. I don't know why. Zach Braff and Donald Faison are not going to be watching this video. But the last 20 minutes or so of the podcast, they have a guest caller and they just sort of chat about their life, and I don't care. That sounds horrible. But yeah, the callers are just like, oh, me and like my fiance are on a road trip right now and we're watching some Scrubs and it's great. And I'm like, yay, have a nice time. I was only tuning in for the recap and the behind the scenes chat. It is true, I was just there for the recaps. Speaking of which, Shrine of Duty. Another TV show I absolutely love is Line of Duty. So I was pretty thrilled when I discovered the podcast Shrine of Duty, on which hosts Brendan, Rebecca and Hannah recap each episode and then discuss theories as to what's going to happen next. Obviously, Line of Duty has ended. Hopefully just for now, because I need me another season. But the podcast hosts are currently covering another BBC show called Vigil, which I'm also watching, and so I am very much enjoying their recaps. Obituary. Yeah, the clue is in the name. This is a podcast that is not afraid to poke fun at death. Hosts Spencer and Madison look at everything from bizarre death customs from around the world and through history to fun funeral ideas. They also, as the title of the show may suggest, read out some outlandish obituaries every week, and they round the podcast off with a look at some dumbass criminals. Because why not? Crime Countdown. The last one on this list is also hosted by Ash and Elena from Morbid, and in each episode they do a top 10 true crime countdown on everything from the most infamous accomplices in history to those amazing pieces of evidence that completely disrupt the outcome of a trial. I find it really interesting, and it's also a shorter podcast than some of the ones on the list, so it tends to be one that you can just pop on while you're doing things around the house. If you're into true crime, I recommend it. What I will say is that this one is now only available on Spotify, but you can find all of the old episodes in all the usual places. All the usual podcast places, that is, because I just looked under my bed and it's not under here. So those are my 8 favourite podcasts. Like I said, there are some other ones I listen to sort of semi-regularly, but you know, if I go through all of them, we will be here all day. And in case you're thinking, wow, Emma, if you like podcasts so much, why don't you just start your own? Well, Leslie and I did start a podcast. It was called World's Worst Mixtape, and we really enjoyed making it, but we only got around to 2 episodes because we have a lot on at the moment. You know, I am a busy bear and so is she. Also, I co-host with my friend Mikey a Manic Street Preachers podcast called Manic Street Speakers. Wow, that was hard to say as one big sentence. So you can find that if you really want to hear my dulcet tones in your ear holes. I would genuinely love to do more podcasting, but I just don't have enough hours in my day. Do you like podcasts? If you do, leave me some recommendations in the comments. I will get around to listening to them. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a thumbs up. You can click on my floaty head if you'd like to subscribe, and over there is last week's video. I'm going to go listen to a podcast. Talk to you next week. Bye!